The magnificent atrium of the Alliance Council chamber stretched like a cathedral of diplomacy, its vaulted ceiling adorned with representations of 1,000 worlds. The structure itself was a testament to the cooperation of over 300 sentient species, each contributing to its impossible architecture. Ambient light shifted through the spectrum, currently settled into a pale blue that most species found calming. Today, however, no amount of architectural marvels or carefully calibrated lighting could dispel the tension humming through the air. Captain Dylan Sebastian stood at the entrance, shoulders squared beneath his formal Alliance uniform. The insignia of Earth glinted on his chest, a simple blue sphere that belied the reputation it carried. Behind him, 5 other humans waited in perfect formation, their expressions carefully neutral despite the weight of 1 trillion alien eyes. "Captain Sebastian," a melodious voice floated from an overhead speaker. "The Council acknowledges the Earth delegation. Please proceed to your designated area." Dylan nodded, more for his team's benefit than for the unseen announcer. The small group of humans moved in practiced unison, their steps measured and deliberate as they crossed the polished floor. Representatives from dozens of species lined their path, some retreating subtly as the humans passed. The whispering was impossible to ignore. Deathworlders, predators, warriors. Earth's classification as a death world had initially been met with disbelief from humanity. How could their beautiful blue planet, with its beaches and forests and mountain ranges, be considered among the most dangerous environments in known space? But as contact with other species increased, understanding dawned. The constant threats that humans had evolved alongside, predators, diseases, natural disasters, extreme weather patterns, were mercifully absent on most inhabited worlds. The gravity alone would have crushed many of the Alliance species. The microbes would have devoured others from the inside out. The atmospheric composition would have poisoned the rest. Humans had evolved in hell without realizing it, and they had thrived. Dylan felt a familiar weight in his stomach as his team reached their designated area, a raised platform allowing visibility of the central floor. The symbolism wasn't lost on him. Predator species were always positioned at eye level or higher than their potential prey. It was one of countless accommodations embedded in Alliance protocol, designed to prevent instinctual panic responses among the more vulnerable species. "Status update," Dylan murmured, his voice pitched for human ears only. Lieutenant Sophia Reyes, his second in command, responded without moving her lips, another skill that unnerved their alien counterparts. "All channels monitoring, security feeds clear. Alliance military presence increased by 30% compared to standard protocol." "They're expecting trouble," remarked Chief Medical Officer Thomas Lynn. "Can you blame them?" Dylan kept his expression neutral as he surveyed the chamber. "This is unprecedented." The unprecedented event wasn't merely Earth's participation. Humans had been grudgingly accepted into the Alliance 5 years earlier, after proving they could control their aggressive tendencies. No. Today's historic moment lay in what was about to occur, the first official meeting between 2 Category 5 Deathworld species in Alliance history. Humans and Larians. "Movement at the eastern entrance," Lieutenant Reyes reported quietly. Dylan felt the chamber's atmosphere shift before he saw them. A collective intake of breath from 100 different respiratory systems. The subtle shuffling of bodies moving away from the newcomers. The Larians had arrived. If humans had evolved in hell, Larians had evolved in something far worse. Their homeworld, Lar, orbited too close to its sun, bathed in radiation that would kill most species within minutes. Its gravity was crushing, its atmosphere thick with chemicals that would be considered toxic waste on most planets. Violent storms lashed its surface constantly, and tectonic activity regularly reshaped entire continents. And the wildlife, what humans might recognize as a blend of reptile, insect, and nightmare, engaged in an endless, vicious battle for survival that made Earth's food chains look like playground games. The Larians themselves reflected their world. Standing nearly 8 feet tall, their bodies were covered in overlapping plates that resembled both scales and exoskeleton. Multiple limbs, 4 primary arms, and 2 powerful legs moved with disconcerting precision. Their elongated heads featured compound eyes that gleamed with intelligence and sensory appendages that constantly tasted the air. Most disturbingly to other Alliance species, the Larians made no attempt to conceal the natural weapons they had evolved: serrated ridges along their forearms, retractable claws, and what could only be described as mandibles framing mouths filled with crystalline teeth. The Larian delegation moved with fluid grace despite their size, taking up position on the platform opposite the humans. 7 of them, Dylan noted. One more than the human delegation, a subtle claim of superiority that he chose to ignore. Between the 2 platforms stretched the council floor, where representatives from the Alliance's founding species sat in a semicircle, their anxiety evident even across diverse physiologies. Supreme Counselor Zin, a Miralin whose translucent body pulsed with nervous light patterns, rose from the central position. The chamber quieted immediately. This council session is now convened. Zin's voice was amplified throughout the chamber, simultaneously translated for all present. Today marks a historic moment for the Alliance of Sentient Species. For the first time, we welcome representatives from 2 Category 5 evolutionary worlds to formal diplomatic exchange. The Supreme Counselor's appendages gestured toward both delegations. Captain Dylan Sebastian, representing Earth and humanity. Dylan stepped forward and bowed slightly, the universal gesture of respect adopted by the Alliance. War Chief Vizara, representing Lar and the Larian Dominion. From the opposite platform, the largest of the Larians moved forward, nearly 9 feet tall. Vizara's plates shimmered with iridescent patterns that Dylan recognized as military honors. Unlike the human delegation's ceremonial weapons, small sidearms chosen more for tradition than functionality. Vizara wore actual battle implements, a serrated staff strapped to his back and what appeared to be projectile launchers integrated into his forearm plates. The Larian made no bow. Instead, Vizara extended his forearms in different directions, a gesture unknown to the human delegation. Zin's body flickered with anxious patterns. As is Alliance custom, when 2 species meet in formal capacity for the first time, we invite the representatives to approach the center for direct introduction. This was the moment the entire chamber had been dreading. 2 apex predator species, face to face on the council floor. Security personnel positioned throughout the chamber shifted subtly, readying themselves for potential violence. Medical teams stood by with species-specific emergency equipment. Dylan stepped down from the human platform, highly conscious of every movement. Alliance training had drilled into him the importance of appearing non-threatening. Hands visible, no sudden movements. Relaxed posture despite inner tension. War Chief Vizara descended with considerably less restraint, his massive form seeming to take up more space than physically possible. The floor vibrated slightly beneath his weight. They approached each other in the center of the chamber, stopping at the prescribed distance of 3 meters, close enough for conversation, far enough to theoretically react if either attacked. Dylan looked up at the Larian war chief, taking in details that the Alliance briefings had failed to capture. The complex patterns etched into Vizara's plates, the way his secondary arms moved independently of his primary limbs, the faint odor of sulfur and something metallic. Captain Sebastian, Vizara spoke, his voice deeper than Dylan expected and tinged with an electronic quality from the translation device embedded somewhere in his anatomy. Earth's warrior. War Chief Vizara, Dylan responded evenly. Lar's finest. A ripple moved through Vizara's plates, a gesture Dylan couldn't interpret. The massive alien took a step forward, breaking protocol and causing several counselors to rise in alarm. Security forces around the chamber tensed, hands moving to weapons. Dylan held his ground, giving no outward sign of the adrenaline surging through his system. Every human instinct screamed danger as the Larian now towered over him, close enough that Dylan could feel heat radiating from the alien's body. What happened next would be replayed on news feeds across the galaxy for years to come. War Chief Vizara, supreme military leader of one of the most formidable species ever encountered, slowly lowered his massive head before Captain Dylan Sebastian. The Larian was bowing. The council chamber erupted in chaos. Representatives leapt to their feet, voices raised in dozens of languages as translation systems struggled to keep pace. Security forces froze in confusion, weapons half drawn. Dylan stood perfectly still, his diplomatic training failing him completely in the face of this unexpected development. No briefing, no protocol, no historical precedent had prepared him for a Larian, especially their war chief, to display submission to a human. But as Vizara remained in his bowed position, Dylan's instincts took over. He slowly raised his hand and placed it gently on the ridged crest of the Larian's head. The chamber fell utterly silent. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, the human and the Larian remained in this impossible tableau. Predator comforting predator, Deathworlder soothing Deathworlder. Finally, Vizara straightened, his compound eyes fixed on Dylan with an intensity that transcended species barriers. "The debt is acknowledged," the Larian stated, his voice carrying throughout the silent chamber. Dylan nodded once. As is the honor of its payment, Supreme Counselor Zin's body had gone almost completely transparent with shock. This is unprecedented," the Miralin finally managed. "War Chief Vizara, your actions require explanation. The Council was led to believe this would be your first contact with humans." "First official contact," Vizara corrected, still looking at Dylan. "Captain Sebastian and I have met before." The revelation sent another wave of murmurs through the chamber. "When?" demanded a Tolari representative, their feathered crest fully extended in agitation. "How is this possible without Alliance knowledge?" Dylan cleared his throat, drawing attention back to himself. 2 standard years ago, in the Calypso Expanse, a remote, largely uncharted region of space where both human and Larian expeditions had been authorized for separate exploration missions. The mention of the location caused several counselors to exchange significant looks. "The Alliance received no reports of contact," stated Zin, light patterns now pulsing rapidly across their translucent form. "Because none were filed," Dylan admitted, "by either party." The implications of this revelation, that both humans and Larians had independently decided to conceal their encounter, clearly disturbed the Council. "This session will recess for 1 hour," announced Zin abruptly. "When we reconvene, both delegations will provide full disclosure regarding this previous encounter." As the chamber began to clear, Dylan found himself still standing face-to-face with Vizara. Around them, security personnel maintained a wary perimeter, but made no move to separate them. "They fear what we will tell them," Vizara observed, his mandibles clicking softly. Dylan allowed himself a small smile. "They should." The hour's recess passed in tense preparation. The human delegation huddled together, reviewing the official story they had prepared. A story that omitted certain details while emphasizing others. Dylan knew the Larians would be doing the same in their assigned quarters. Some truths were too dangerous to share, even with allies. When the Council reconvened, the chamber was significantly emptier. Only essential personnel remained, and the public viewing galleries had been cleared. Recording devices were officially deactivated, though Dylan suspected at least 3 different species were maintaining secret records. Supreme Counselor Zin had been joined by the full Executive Council, 9 members representing the original founding species of the Alliance. Their presence underscored the gravity of the situation. "Captain Sebastian," Zin began without preamble, "please recount your unsanctioned encounter with the Larians." Dylan stepped forward, his posture military straight. 2 standard years ago, Earth exploration vessel Odyssey was conducting a survey of the Calypso region, specifically the asteroid field designated CR7. We detected unusual energy readings from within the field and altered course to investigate. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. What we found was a Larian scout ship in distress. Their propulsion system had been damaged by asteroid impact, and they were trapped in a deteriorating orbit around a dwarf star. A Volchex counselor interrupted, their crystalline structure vibrating with skepticism. "You expect us to believe that 2 Deathworld predator species, upon first contact," did not immediately engage in combat? Lieutenant Reyes stepped forward beside Dylan. With respect, Counselor, we were a bit preoccupied with the imminent spatial collapse that threatened both vessels. Dylan nodded. The gravitational forces were creating a cascade effect in the asteroid field. We had minutes, at most, before both ships would be destroyed. War Chief Vizara spoke from across the chamber. The human assessment is accurate. Our vessel had lost maneuvering capability, and our distress signals were being blocked by mineral compositions in the asteroid field. The arrival of the human ship was unexpected. What happened next? Prompted Zin. Dylan exchanged a brief look with Vizara before continuing. We established communication through mathematical sequences. Neither side had the other's language patterns in our translation matrices. Once basic understanding was achieved, we coordinated an emergency plan. Which was? Asked a Hevelin counselor, their tentacled form rippling with interest. The human vessel extended its shield perimeter to encompass our ship, Vizara explained. This required them to divert power from their weapon systems, rendering them vulnerable if we had hostile intent. The significance of this detail was not lost on the Council. A human vessel had deliberately disarmed itself to assist Larians, a species with a reputation for ruthlessness matched only by humans themselves. The combined shield held long enough for our engineers to implement emergency repairs. Vizara continued. However, the gravitational stresses were increasing exponentially. Evacuation became necessary. Dylan picked up the narrative. We docked ships and created a temporary pressure seal. Not all systems were compatible, which meant both crews were exposed to environmental hazards. For clarity, interrupted a Volchex counselor. You are stating that humans and Larians physically occupied the same space, breathed the same atmosphere? Yes, Dylan confirmed, for approximately 6 standard hours. A wave of astonishment swept through the council. The biochemistry of both species was considered highly dangerous to most other life forms. The idea of them sharing breathing space was almost inconceivable. During this time, Vizara added, 3 Larian crew members and 2 humans suffered acute reaction symptoms. Medical intervention was required. Dr. Thomas Lin stepped forward from the human delegation. I coordinated with the Larian biological specialist. We had to synthesize emergency treatments using combined medical supplies. Both species displayed remarkable physiological adaptability. The rescue operation was ultimately successful, Dylan continued. We transferred essential personnel to the Odyssey and used the Larian vessel as a counterbalance to escape the gravitational well. 17 Larians survived, Vizara stated, out of an original crew of 23, all due to human intervention. The council chamber fell silent as the implications of this revelation sank in. And yet, Supreme Counselor Zin finally said, neither species reported this encounter. Neither species acknowledged that first contact had occurred. This violates no fewer than 14 Alliance protocols. Dylan straightened his shoulders. With respect, Supreme Counselor, both our species were still under probationary status within the Alliance. The Larians had not yet been granted full membership, and Earth was still subject to restricted exploration parameters. You feared punishment, stated the Volchex counselor flatly. We feared misinterpretation, Vizara corrected. Had we reported this incident, what conclusion would the Alliance have drawn? 2 predator species, meeting in secret, cooperating without supervision. Your prejudices would have seen conspiracy where there was only survival. The accusation hung in the air, uncomfortable but undeniably accurate. A Hevelin counselor's tentacles writhed in agitation. This still does not explain War Chief Vizara's unprecedented display of deference to a human. All eyes turned to Vizara, whose plates shifted in what Dylan had come to recognize as their equivalent of a shrug. I owe Captain Sebastian a life debt, the Larian stated simply. By Larian custom, this is acknowledged through the bow of honor. Life debt, echoed Zin. Vizara's compound eyes fixed on Dylan. During evacuation, structural failure caused a breach between our vessels. Captain Sebastian and I were separated from both crews, trapped in a rapidly decompressing chamber with failing environmental systems. Dylan felt the memory surface, the blaring alarms, the plummeting temperature, the struggle to breathe as atmosphere vented into space. The emergency bulkheads activated automatically. Dylan explained, "We had 90 seconds before complete decompression." "There was one functioning escape pod," Vizara continued. "Designed for Lyrian physiology. Too small for both of us." The council chamber had grown so quiet that Dylan could hear the faint hum of the environmental systems. "Captain Sebastian overrode the manual safety controls," Vizara stated. "He placed me in the escape pod despite my objections." "How did you survive, Captain?" asked Zin, light patterns pulsing slowly across their form. Dylan hesitated. This was the part of the story they had agreed to modify. The full truth would raise too many questions, expose too many secrets. "I managed to seal myself in a maintenance duct," he said, the practiced lie coming smoothly. "The residual atmosphere and insulation protected me long enough for rescue teams to locate me after the immediate crisis passed." Vizara's mandibles clicked, a sound Dylan recognized as the Larian equivalent of a knowing smile. The lie would hold. The Alliance didn't need to know about the experimental emergency protocols that humans had developed, the genetic modifications that allowed temporary survival in hostile conditions, or the medical procedures that had been required afterward. Some secrets belonged to Deathworlders alone. After we returned to our respective territories, Dylan continued, both our governments independently decided that reporting the incident could jeopardize our standing with the Alliance. The decision was made to classify the encounter and continue on our separate diplomatic paths. Until today, Vizara added, when we could acknowledge the truth on our own terms. The council chambers buzzed with subdued conversations as the executive council members conferred among themselves. Dylan used the moment to glance at his team, noting their carefully maintained composure despite the tension. Finally, Supreme Councilor Zin addressed both delegations. This council must evaluate the significant breach of protocol represented by your actions. However, we cannot overlook the implications of your encounter. Two species evolved in the most extreme conditions known to the Alliance, capable of not merely coexistence, but cooperation. Zin's form pulsed with complex light patterns. This changes our understanding of Deathworld psychology. If I may, Supreme Counselor. Dylan stepped forward. Our encounter wasn't merely about survival, it was about recognition. Explain, demanded the Volchek's counselor. Dylan looked toward Vizara before responding. Humans and Larians are more alike than different. We evolved on planets that tried to kill us every day. We developed intelligence not as a luxury, but as a necessity. We understand what it means to fight for every breath, to consider every environment potentially hostile, to never take safety for granted. Vizara's massive form shifted as he joined Dylan in the center of the chamber. When we met the humans, we recognized ourselves. For the first time since joining the Alliance, we encountered a species that understood our fundamental nature. Which is, prompted Zin. Adaptability, Dylan and Vizara said simultaneously. The synchronicity of their response sent another ripple of reaction through the council. The Alliance has consistently misunderstood both our species. Dylan continued. You see our strength, our resilience, our capacity for violence, and you label us predators, dangerous, unpredictable. What you fail to see, Vizara added, is that these same traits make us the ultimate survivors. And survivors understand the value of cooperation better than any other beings in the galaxy. The implications of their words settled over the chamber like a physical weight. Two Deathworld species, historically feared for their potential for violence, were demonstrating a capacity for alliance that defied all predictions. Supreme Counselor Zin's form had stilled, light patterns slowing to a thoughtful pulse. The Council will need time to process these revelations. We will adjourn for the day and resume discussions tomorrow. As the chamber began to clear, Dylan found himself once again face-to-face with Vizara. The massive Larian extended one primary arm, the gesture unmistakably human in origin. Dylan grasped the offered limb, feeling the rough texture of Vizara's plates against his skin. They will watch us more closely now, Vizara observed quietly. Dylan nodded. Let them watch. Perhaps they'll learn something. Around them, representatives from dozens of species observed the handshake with varying degrees of astonishment and unease. The sight of humanity's most decorated captain and Lars' supreme war chief engaged in friendly contact defied a century of xenopsychological theory. Lieutenant Reyes approached, her expression carefully neutral. Captain, the Alliance Security Director has requested our presence. Apparently, there are procedural matters to discuss. Dylan released Vizara's arm with a knowing smile. Damage control begins. They fear what they do not understand. Vizara's mandibles clicked softly. And they understand even less than they believe. The following day brought a noticeably different atmosphere to the council chamber. The human and Larian delegations were no longer positioned at opposite ends of the room, but adjacent to each other, a symbolic placement that spoke volumes about the council's evolving perspective. Security presence had been reduced by half, and the public galleries reopened, filled to capacity with representatives from across the Alliance eager to witness the historic proceedings. Supreme Counselor Zinn opened the session with uncharacteristic directness. After extensive deliberation, this council has reached several conclusions regarding yesterday's revelations. The chamber quieted immediately. First, both Earth and LAR will receive formal reprimands for violating reporting protocols. This matter is considered resolved with today's disclosure. Dylan exchanged a glance with Vizara. A reprimand was the mildest possible consequence, essentially a diplomatic slap on the wrist. Second, Zinn continued, the Alliance Xenopsychology Division will establish a new research initiative focusing specifically on Deathworld psychology and interspecies cooperation. This announcement generated approving murmurs throughout the chamber. The scientific community had long been fascinated by both humans and Larians, though few had dared to study them directly. Finally, and most significantly, Zinn's form brightened with formal emphasis. The Executive Council proposes the establishment of a joint Human-Larian Advisory Committee on Extreme Environment Operations. Dylan straightened in surprise. This was unexpected and unprecedented. No two species had ever been granted a specialized committee without centuries of proven cooperation. This committee would serve as a resource for Alliance operations in hazardous environments, drawing on the unique evolutionary advantages of both species. Zinn explained, Captain Sebastian and War Chief Vizara would serve as founding co-chairs, reporting directly to the Executive Council. The proposal was met with a mixture of reactions from the assembled representatives, everything from enthusiastic approval to obvious apprehension. We will now open the floor for discussion, Zinn announced. What followed was 4 hours of intense debate. Species after species rose to express concerns, raise questions, or offer qualified support. The central question emerged repeatedly. Could two predator species, both evolved in environments of extreme competition, truly maintain peaceful cooperation? Throughout the debate, Dylan and Vizara remained silent, allowing the Alliance to work through its collective anxiety. Their respective teams fielded technical questions about compatibility of operations, chain of command structures, and information-sharing protocols. Finally, as the session neared its conclusion, a Talari representative posed the question that had been underlying much of the day's discussion. How can the Alliance be certain that a closer relationship between humans and Larians won't lead to a power imbalance that threatens other species? The chamber fell silent, the blunt articulation of the fear hanging in the air. Supreme Counselor Zinn turned toward the human and Larian delegations. Captain Sebastian, War Chief Vizara, will you address this concern? Dylan glanced at Vizara, who inclined his massive head slightly, a gesture of deference that surprised the chamber once again. Stepping forward, Dylan surveyed the assembled representatives. The Alliance was founded on the principle that diversity creates strength. Different evolutionary paths bring different perspectives, different solutions to shared challenges. He gestured toward the various species present. Some of you evolved in aquatic environments, others in low gravity, others still in atmospheric compositions that would be fatal to many here. Each adaptation represents a unique way of surviving, of thriving. Dylan turned slightly, indicating Vizara and the Larian delegation. Humans and Larians represent another kind of adaptation, one forged in environments that tested the limits of what organic life can endure. Yes, this gave us physical capabilities that might seem threatening, but it also taught us something that may be even more valuable. The cost of conflict, Vizara rumbled, stepping forward to join Dylan. Dylan nodded. Exactly. When every day is a struggle for survival, you learn quickly that unnecessary conflicts waste precious resources. You learn that cooperation multiplies chances of success. You learn that different strengths, combined, create something greater than either could achieve alone. Our worlds taught us to fight, Vizara added, his deep voice carrying throughout the chamber. But they also taught us to choose our battles wisely. The Calypso incident proved that humans and Larians can set aside aggression when cooperation serves greater purpose. And that, Dylan concluded, is what we offer the Alliance, not the threat of combined strength, but the promise of it, directed toward challenges that face us all. The chamber remained silent for several moments after they finished speaking. Then, slowly, representatives began to signal their approval, each according to their species' custom. Miralin light patterns, Talari crest displays, Hevelin tentacle configurations, Volchek's harmonic resonances. Supreme Counselor Zin's form brightened with what Dylan had come to recognize as their equivalent of a smile. The proposal will move to formal vote tomorrow. For now, this council is adjourned. As representatives began to disperse, Dr. Thomas Lin approached Dylan with a data tablet. Captain, preliminary protocols for the Joint Committee, he explained, offering the device, medical and environmental compatibility assessments, primarily. Dylan scanned the information, noting the extensive adaptations that would be required for humans and Larians to work together routinely. Environmental systems would need comprehensive redesigns. Communication protocols would require enhancement. Training programs would need development from scratch. It won't be easy, he remarked. Few worthwhile things are, responded Vizara, who had approached silently despite his massive size. The Larian indicated the data tablet. My science specialist has conducted similar assessments. The challenges are substantial, but not insurmountable. Dylan handed the tablet back to Dr. Lin. We'll need to be transparent about these challenges with the Council. No more secrets. Vizara's plates shifted in what Dylan now recognized as amusement. No more official secrets, perhaps, but I suspect both our species will retain some evolutionary advantages that need not be detailed in committee reports. Dylan allowed himself a small smile. The Larian's observation touched on a reality that had become apparent during their shared crisis in the Calypso expanse. Both humans and Larians had developed capabilities that went well beyond what they had disclosed to the Alliance, adaptations, technologies, and biological innovations born from the crucible of their respective Deathworlds. One step at a time, Dylan replied diplomatically. Today, we've given the Alliance something new to consider, that predators need not always be competitors. And tomorrow? Vizara's compound eyes fixed on Dylan with surprising intensity. Tomorrow we begin proving it wasn't a fluke. The formal vote the following day passed with unexpected margin, 78% of Alliance representatives approving the establishment of the Joint Committee. The remainder abstained. None voted in opposition, a political calculation that Dylan found telling. Even those with reservations weren't willing to officially oppose the unprecedented cooperation between humans and Larians. As the council session concluded, Dylan found himself surrounded by representatives from various species, each eager to establish connection with what was clearly becoming an influential new power center within the Alliance. He handled the diplomatic overtures with practiced ease, making appropriate commitments while avoiding substantive promises. Across the chamber, he could see Vizara engaged in similar maneuvers. The massive Larian somehow projecting patience despite being surrounded by species less than half his size. Quite a change from 3 days ago, observed Lieutenant Reyes, materializing at Dylan's side as the crowd thinned. When we arrived, they could barely look at us without flinching, Fear and opportunity make interesting partners. Dylan replied, "We're still dangerous in their eyes, but now we're dangerous with purpose." Reyes nodded toward the Larian delegation. "And our new friends, do you trust them?" Dylan considered the question carefully. Trust was a complicated concept between species with such different evolutionary backgrounds. The shared crisis in the Calypso expanse had created a bond, certainly. But beyond that, "I trust their self-interest," he finally answered. "And right now, that aligns with ours." The chamber had nearly emptied when Supreme Counselor Zin approached, their translucent form pulsing with formal patterns. "Captain Sebastian, a moment of your time." Dylan nodded to Reyes, who tactfully withdrew. "Your delegation has conducted itself with remarkable restraint these past days." Zin observed once they were relatively isolated. "The Council acknowledges this." "Thank you, Supreme Counselor. We understand the sensitivity of the situation." Zin's form shimmered in what Dylan had come to recognize as their version of hesitation. "There is something I must ask, as representative of the Executive Council, something that troubles us." Dylan maintained a neutral expression. "I'll answer if I can. The account you and War Chief Vizara provided of your survival during the Calypso incident." Zin's patterns shifted to indicate skepticism. "Our xenobiologists have analyzed the parameters you described. They find it improbable." A cold feeling settled in Dylan's stomach. He had known this might come. The official story had holes that careful analysis would eventually detect. "Improbable how?" he asked, playing for time. "The maintenance duct you claim sheltered you." Zin's patterns intensified. "Would not have retained sufficient atmosphere or temperature to sustain human life for the duration indicated. By our calculations, you should have suffered fatal exposure." Dylan met the counselor's gaze steadily. This was the moment that would define humanity's future relationship with the Alliance, a crossroads of truth and diplomacy. "Supreme Counselor," he said carefully, "there are aspects of human physiology that we haven't fully disclosed to the Alliance, adaptations that allow us to temporarily withstand conditions that your models might consider unsurvivable." It wasn't technically a lie. The experimental procedures that had saved his life in the Calypso expanse had indeed involved enhanced human adaptability, though with significant technological assistance that remained classified at the highest levels. Zin's patterns swirled with what might have been concern. "You're suggesting that humans possess biological capabilities beyond what has been registered in Alliance databases?" Dylan smiled slightly. "I'm suggesting that Deathworlds produce species with extraordinary survival instincts. It's why the Larians respect us, and we them. We recognize in each other the drive to overcome impossible odds." The Supreme Counselor's form pulsed rapidly, their species equivalent of deep thought. "This committee you will co-chair with War Chief Vizara. It represents a significant shift in Alliance power structures. Many are concerned about where it might lead." "Change always brings concern," Dylan acknowledged. "But it also brings opportunity. Humans and Larians have much to offer the Alliance, if you're willing to look past your preconceptions of what Deathworld species must be." Zin's patterns slowed gradually. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson of these proceedings, that our understanding of evolutionary psychology requires expansion. Or perhaps, Dylan suggested, the lesson is simpler, that sometimes the most dangerous path and the most beneficial one can be the same. The council chamber had emptied completely now, leaving only Dylan and the Supreme Counselor in its vast space. Above them, the representations of 1,000 worlds seemed to watch their exchange with silent interest. "The committee's first official meeting is scheduled for next month," Zin said finally. "The Executive Council will be monitoring its progress closely." Dylan recognized the statement for what it was, both warning and opportunity. "We look forward to exceeding expectations." As the Supreme Counselor departed, Dylan remained alone in the chamber for a moment, contemplating the events of the past 3 days. What had begun as a diplomatic formality had transformed into something far more significant, the first alliance between Deathworld species in known history. He thought of Earth, distant but ever present in his consciousness, of the challenges his species had overcome to reach this point, of the secrets they still kept, and the revelations yet to come. The galaxy was about to discover what happened when two predator species chose cooperation over competition. When the survivors of Hell decided to work together, when two Deathworld species met, and one bowed, but not in submission, as the Alliance had misinterpreted, in recognition, in respect, in acknowledgement of a truth that only another Deathworlder could understand, that the greatest strength isn't in domination, but in the choice to set it aside.